And about 6 weeks ago, in preparation for this series and in preparation for this season at 7 Marks, I felt like I just sensed that I needed to do something different to prepare as your pastor and leading this ministry, and something that I hadn't done before. And so I set out to go on this silence and solitude retreat. And it's not that I hadn't been on retreats throughout my career, study retreats and days where I would get my head straight, or learning cohorts or conferences. So it wasn't like I hadn't gone away to get focused, but this was different. This was going to be 4 days with no phone, no computer, no TV, no Netflix, no anything, no people, no food. And it was just for me to dial in and focus with God. I'd never done that before. And I just, whether it was prompting of the Holy Spirit, a nudge from God, whatever, I just sensed that I needed to do business with me and God. Like, I needed to get some stuff straight with me, and then just get His heart and head on his direction. This is His church. And so I set out. I went and I rented this Airbnb about an hour and a half from here. And so Sunday afternoon, ate with my family, and then I rolled out. And on my way there, I found myself in this debate with God on my way. And because I sensed that He wanted me to fast for these 4 days, but I didn't want to. Like, I like to eat. So I didn't want to fast. And so I'm having this, I don't have any food in the car, but I'm still debating with Him on my way. And even when I get there, like, I'm reluctant. And even when I get there and I meet the guy who I'm renting the Airbnb from, he's kind of giving me the lay of the land. And I said, hey, by the way, man, where's the closest grocery store to here? And what kind of restaurants are around? See, I had not surrendered that yet. And so after some small talk, I go into the rental, and wouldn't you know, on the counter in the rental, there's this little basket of some snacks. Like, they have on the airplane, like 3 or 4 snacks. And I'm like, okay, these are backup snacks. Like if I can't do this, like I can just lean on it. Y'all, look. Those snacks were gone before I went to bed that night. I'm just telling you. I did have a come to Jesus meeting later that night and fasted for the rest of the time there. But I got settled in, unpacked my stuff in this little house, and then I went into the living room, and it had this window that looked out into the woods. And so I sat down. And in the quiet, got settled, and in the quiet, I just want to tell, I was not ready for how quickly the questions would start to pop in my head, and the resistance that would come. I wasn't ready for that. Like, I love to be by myself, and I thought, this is a slam dunk for me. This is going to be amazing. But as soon as I got settled, these questions started to surface. And Tyler talked about it last week in his talk. He said, hey, you got to know that when you pursue silence and solitude, you're going to have all kinds of external resistance, internal resistance. Like, I wanted to grab for something. I wanted to occupy. I wanted to look around the house, see what else is in there. Like, they're puzzles or something. Now, like, what can I do to occupy my head space? And I found that through the next 4 days, I encountered myself. I encountered my enemy. And I encountered God. And with self, it was immediate, like questions of inadequacy And I found myself fighting to not want to be there just with God. And I found myself not wanting to surrender. Like I went with this, I knew it was an invitation from God. And I went with this kind of skeleton agenda of what I wanted to do over these few days. And I found myself not wanting to surrender that agenda. I found myself not wanting to surrender control of what I was going to do while I was there. Honestly, I was fighting just being quiet and listening. And with my enemy, man, I wanted to, like, there are some questions that immediately, and statements that immediately started to surface, like, this is stupid. Like, what are you doing here? Why? Like, God's everywhere. You didn't need to come here to meet with God. Like, God is, you can meet God wherever. So why do you think that, like, if you stop eating, what, you're gonna experience God more? Or if you get really quiet, you're gonna experience God more? Like, these are the lies that my enemy started. Like, what are you doing, Paul? Like, get back to work. Everybody else is working, so get back to work. So these are some of the lies, but thankfully and fortunately, I also encountered God that marked me in some really significant ways, which is why I went on that retreat in the first place. So for the remainder of this series, the next 3 weeks, as we bring this series to a close, we're going to talk about those 3 encounters. Encounter with self, encounter with your enemy, and encounter with God over these 3 weeks. And immediately you might be thinking, and Tyler raised this question last week, why on earth would I want to go into silence and solitude if 2 of the encounters I really don't care to have? The encounter with myself and the encounter with my enemy. Well, simply put, without God, you cannot successfully encounter those other 2. And silence and solitude is the most safe, clear space where God can help you with those encounters and where he can speak both truth and grace to you. So see, our greatest problem is that we often walk around life in naivety. Like not knowing who we truly are in Jesus. As followers of Jesus, we walk around not knowing our identity. We walk around not knowing the fight that is going on for our soul every single day. And we walk around not understanding how much we need the Spirit of God to live out the life that all of us were created to live. And so silence and solitude, it helps us. Those practices help change that, to make us aware and to help us engage in the life God's called us to. And to show you what I mean, I want to invite you to turn with me to Exodus chapter 33, which is going to be our passage. And as we've learned the last few weeks, something transformative happens in the eremos. Remember, that's the Greek word that we taught you that means wilderness or desert or this lonely, solitary place. And as Tyler mentioned last week, the wilderness was a kind of proving ground for the Israelite people, one that truly revealed where they were, who they were, and what they were made of, but at the same time, it was preparing them for what was in front of them. The wilderness was this transforming place between where they came from, slavery in Egypt, to where they were going, the promised land. In fact, that's a picture of us as followers of Jesus. Because in Jesus, we were rescued from our slavery to sin. We were rescued from sin. And ultimately, we will live with Jesus in eternity. But in the between time, he is doing this transformative work in our lives. We are in the in-between. And so, before we get into this passage today in Exodus chapter 33, let me just give you some context for where we are. And the Israelites are now just a few months removed from Egypt, from slavery. And they come to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And as they approach this mountain, God asks Moses to approach it, only him, and so he does, and God gives him some commands and some instructions on how to lead these people. So he turns around, and he tells the people, he's like, hey, here's some commands and some instructions, and the people are like, okay, we're in, like, that's awesome, we're in, we're going to do whatever God says. And then God invites Moses for this extended time up on top of Mount Sinai, where he's going to get pretty specific about all these laws and commands and how to build the tabernacle, the place that God would dwell among his people. And so Moses goes up to this mountain, on top of this mountain, and he's up there for 40 days, a little bit over a month. And so some of you know this story. And so while he's up on the mountain, the people begin to wonder, is he ever coming back? Like, let's be honest, we would be the same. We would be wondering the same thing. Is he coming back down? And so, since they don't know, they talk Aaron, his right-hand man, into making a god. And so they all pitch in their jewelry, and so they form this golden calf. And they worship. They begin worshiping this calf as their new god. Like wild worship, crazy worship. And now they're saying that this God is the one who actually rescued them from Egypt, and they are going to follow this God. So all that's happening while Moses is up on the mountain. He comes down, he's furious. Like he is ticked off. And so he has these stone tablets that God wrote all of the instructions on, and he throws them down. They shatter into pieces. And then with the help of the Levites, Moses executes justice on 3,000 people, killing them for their sin and disobedience. But that's not the worst part. After that, God says, hey, Moses, I'm done. Like, I'm done. I'm done with these people. Like, you all can go do what you're going to do. You can go to the promised land. You can do whatever. But I'm not going. I'm not going to stick with you people. And so Moses immediately, it crushes him. He's filled with sorrow. Translates it to the people. They are crushed. They are filled with sorrow. And that's where we come into chapter 33. But before I read this, I feel like I need to pause for a little bit and help us all get in Moses' shoes right now. By all stretches, Moses was thrown in the deep end with this whole rescuing the people from Egypt thing. You got to admit that. He was raised by parents from a different race that weren't his real parents. So right away, he's got some identity issues. He ran away from his father because his father, Pharaoh, wanted to kill him. So now he's got not only identity issues, he's got daddy issues. He ended up living in obscurity in the desert, seemingly forgotten for 40 years. Purpose and meaning issues now. Like, what am I doing out here? Who am I? Then he's encountered by God through a burning bush, who he had very little, if any, relationship with this God. And so God says, out of this bush, I want you to rescue my people from Egypt. What? What are you talking? Who are you, first of all? And do you know who you're talking to? Like, I'm nobody. So he's got issues of spiritual doubt. He's got self-doubt. And he finally relents. And he goes back with his sidekick to do what God asked him to do. But when he gets back to Egypt, he has a leader in Pharaoh that continually dismisses whatever he's saying. So now Moses is dealing with rejection and not being taken seriously. And so he finally leads these people out of Egypt. God actually is rescuing them, miraculously rescuing these people with Moses in leadership. He gets out to this desert. Now he's at the edge of Mount Sinai. He goes and he meets with God. But now God is saying to him, I'm done with you. I'm done with these people. So now he has issues of leadership, like he's failed as a leader, and he's unable to lead this people, and ultimately abandonment, because God's like, I'm done. I'm done with you. I'm done with these people. So let me ask you a question. Do you think that Moses was struggling internally at this point? Do you think that Moses was struggling with himself and doubts about God, doubts about who he was? Do you think he was questioning, why in the world am I out here? What am I doing? How am I going to get myself out of all of this? I wanted to pause here because we can all find ourselves here. We all walk through these questions of fear in our life, these questions of doubt, these questions of abandonment, these questions of purpose and meaning and failure and inadequacy. That's where we see Moses. But I want you to see what he does and what happens with all of that. Exodus chapter 33, verse 7 reads this. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitched outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. It was his eremos. This is before the tabernacle. The tabernacle was also called the tent of meeting, but this is before the tabernacle was built. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. So for the past few weeks, your action step out of this gathering was to find a place. To find a place to daily meet with God. Here we see Moses in the shadow of everything that just happened with these people, setting up his tent outside the camp, setting himself apart to be with God, free from distraction. So let's talk about this for just a second. Why in the world are we working so hard to communicate to you to try and find a place? Johann Starry, in his book Stolen Focus, states this: the motto of our era should be, I tried to live, but I got distracted. He writes, an average college student focuses on one thing for 19 seconds. The average American adult focuses on a work task in an office setting for no more than 3 minutes at a time. If we are interrupted, it takes over 20 minutes to get back into the same level of focus. He writes, it's only after we set aside our distractions that we can begin to see what we are distracting ourselves from. Often when I ask somebody about their time with God and their relationship with God and how they pursue Him, I get all kinds of answers about their time with God. And some are just even this past week, my time with God is when I'm riding to work. Like, it's the only time I got. So I turn on like my Bible app, and it reads to me over the speakers in the car while I'm riding to work. And some say, I put podcasts in my ears when I'm working out, or I have worship outside the shower when I'm taking a shower, or any number of different ways that people tell me that they spend time with God. And I'm all for all of that. Do all of that. But what we are advocating in this practice is to be alone, temporarily withdraw from everything to be with God, undivided attention to where it is just you and God and nothing else. Personally, I believe that the God of the universe is worthy of that. I believe that he deserves some undivided attention from you. And many of us think that we can multitask. We brag on the fact that we can do more than one thing at a time. But that's a myth. It's been proven over and over and over that you cannot multitask. Your brain is like a computer with open tabs, right? And so, you might be working on multiple things at one time, but you can only focus on one thing at one time. And what we have grown accustomed to doing is switching from one thing to the next. And we're quickly switching like fast from this to this to this, and they're all getting a piece of me. Even social media knows this. Social media, they know that the most effective form of communication is fast and to the point, because our attention span does not last. But here's what's happening, and we don't realize this. It is shaping us into the kind of people that cannot stick with anything for too long, including our relationships, and most importantly, our relationship with God. And that's why we see here, that's the point of withdrawing. And that's what we see Moses doing here. And so he continues in verse 8, and whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. And as Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud, that signified God's presence, and the entire community knew that, would come down and stay. Don't miss this. It would come down and it would stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshiped. Isn't that interesting what one person's engagement with God will do? Each at the entrance of their tent, the Lord would speak to Moses in his tent face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide, Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. It's not clear if he's at the entrance of the tent. Is he guarding the tent? Is he trying to get the leftovers from what God said? I don't know. The scriptures and theologians aren't sure what exactly that means, that Joshua stayed there. I do find it interesting, though, that his proximity to the tent may have rubbed off a little bit, because he's the one that would follow Moses and would lead the people of Israel into the promised land. But Moses, at this point, we've already talked about this, he's over his head, but in his desperation and sufficiency, there are some things that he discovered about himself. And there are some things that he discovered about being in solitude and silence. One is that it offers you the undivided presence of the Father. It offers you and I the undivided presence of the Father. So this past week, I just tried this exercise. I encourage you to do it this week. So this past week, I tried this exercise to where I would focus in on how quickly, this sounds weird, I would lose focus in my interactions with people. So it could be staff that came into my office, or a meeting that I was in, or my conversations with Martha, to where I would watch how quickly, and it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing how quickly my attention and my presence would just fade, and I'd have to bring it back to, hey, can you what did you just, like, what was it that you, Martha hates this, but I do it all the time. Like, what did you just say? She knows I wasn't listening. In putting verses 7 through 9 together, the Bible tells us that when Moses came to the tent of meeting to inquire of God, the pillar of God would come and stay. It would stay. God came near to Moses. He experienced what the prophet Jeremiah said in Jeremiah 29:13. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. And James writes in his letters, come near to God and he will come near to you. Moses made this intentional move to get answers and notice that God was fully engaged. When we come into silence and solitude, we see ourselves, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but we also see that God is there. He promises to meet you there in silence and solitude. As you read further in these chapters in Exodus 34, see that as a result of Moses being with God, his appearance changes. He has to wear a veil. The longer that we engage with God and come into his presence, undivided, undistracted, it eventually transforms both our appearance and our character. Then the result is our silence and solitude benefits those that are around us. When Moses went into the tent, the Bible tells us that people were watching him. They were watching him. The purpose for Moses going into the tent wasn't so that they could watch him. Some of us put silence and solitude or our practices on a checklist or a to-do list to be seen or to be seen by God so that he awards us for all of our hard work. And as we'll see in a minute, Moses wasn't doing this to earn somebody's esteem or favor. That's not the goal. Most people will not know what you're doing or when you are practicing silence and solitude. The point is that I'm trying to make that as a result of your time in silence and solitude, the people around you become beneficiaries. Why? Because your time with God changes how you treat people. It changes how you interact with people. What they knew of Moses was that he had the ear of God. And God had his ear, and the result of his activity directly impacted them, leading them to worship. They would stand at their tents and worship. The walk of Moses led them to look to God. So let me ask you a question. Does your walk lead people to God? Your everyday walk, does it lead people to God? It may be that some time in silence and solitude would change that. We all have a lot of stuff going on in our lives. And we are all too often consumed with ourselves and the stuff on our agenda that we completely forget that we, as followers of Jesus, we were put on this planet to love God, and not only to love ourselves, but to love others as ourselves. And it is hard to love when we are rushed, when we are switching between relationships and things on our agenda. That's why Jesus said, hey, abide in me. And I will teach you how to love. I will show you how to love. I will show you how to light up your world. He says this in Matthew 5, you're the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And after Jesus raises from the dead, he commissions his disciples to go out. Like, I'm going to be with you. Go make disciples. Like, light up the world. Love people to Jesus. Tell them the good news empowered by the Spirit. And nothing could describe, listen, nothing could describe the boldness of the disciples and loving and lighting up the world other than the fact that they had what? That they had been with Jesus. The same was true with Moses, because in that tent, he was reminded that silence and solitude reminds us of who we are in Jesus. In verse 11, we read this, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. In the original language, it conveys this heart-to-heart relationship, almost like a husband and wife relationship. There are times that I'm with Martha, we don't have to be saying anything, but we are just with each other. We are in the presence of each other. God knew all there was to know about Moses. And Moses wasn't able to hide anything. There was transparency there. There was authenticity there. And watch this, God accepted Moses for who he was in that moment. Everything that we had talked about Moses earlier, his fear, his abandonment, all the issues, all the stuff that was going on with himself, God was fine with all of that. He accepted Moses just as he was. He was conveying to Moses his value as his servant. Yahweh at this point had shown himself in all of these miraculous ways. But now he had come close to Moses in that tent of meeting. It was a picture of Jesus and how Jesus came close when he left heaven and he became one of us. Like God in that tent, Jesus, the kingdom of God, had come near. And Jesus made his dwelling among us, and he began to call those who followed him friends. We read this in John 15, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And he says this to his followers, you are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You didn't choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, listen, remember why they went to the tent? They went to the tent of meeting to inquire of the Lord. Whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. In that tent, Moses recognized that he was deeply loved by God. For many of us, including me, okay, our failure to live out our true identity in Jesus can be traced back to the fact that we just don't really realize the love of God for us. If there was one pretty magnificent transforming moment that happened to me in that 4 days, it was this continual, I can't even explain it. It was just this continual affirmation of his love for me. Just as I am. I don't have to prove myself to him. He just loves me. And Moses recognized that. God was speaking to him as a friend. And so after that, silence and solitude helped him with perspective. See, in the quiet with God, our ego slips away. Because we come to realize we are absolutely nothing without him. We're nothing without him. Listen to Moses as he comes to grip with this, the reality of this. Moses said to the Lord, "You've been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me," watch this, "teach me your ways so I may know you, so I may really know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." And then Moses said, "If your presence does not go with us, don't even send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "I will do the very thing you asked. Watch, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name." Is there anything else more important? When Moses encounters him, nothing else matters. He wants to know him. He wants to continue to walk in the favor of God. In fact, Moses doesn't even care about the promised land if God's not with him. He doesn't even care about anything that's going to come in his life moving forward if God is not with him. Look, in neglecting, listen to me, in neglecting undivided, undistracted time with God, we are communicating, all of us, we are communicating that we would trade God for everything else in our world. Our schedule is more important. Our money is more important. Our friendships are more important. Surfing on the internet is more important. The latest Netflix series is more important. Everything is more important than God. I'm not saying any of that is wrong in and of themselves. All right, so don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that you and I will never know what Moses knew until you and I experience what Moses experienced in silence and solitude, in the tent of meeting where we go to inquire of God. So today, the action step remains the same as it has for the last few weeks. This week, go be with your Father. Go be with your Heavenly Father. He deserves time with you. And as a result, your life will be transformed. If you haven't tried it yet, man, just venture in. If you tried it and you feel like you're all thumbs, you this is horrible or whatever, I need some help, let us know. We want to help you in this practice. Take another step, as Tyler said last week. Whatever you did this week, increase that a little bit. If you weren't very consistent, don't increase it until you get consistent.